Hello from the Heartland. My name is Jenna, and this is Smarter News. News when it matters and why it matters. Our Smarter series features unique people who help us think and live smarter. Today, we're going to talk about one of the biggest stories really on the planet this week, and that is the story of the greatest gymnast in the world, Simone Biles, suddenly withdrawing from Olympic competition, at least for now. We still have some events coming up that she could compete in. We're speaking on Friday morning at the end of a long week, by the way. So it gives you an idea of where we are in the news cycle. And this is a really big story for so many reasons. It was totally unexpected. It's also a little bit confusing. We still don't have a lot of the really important facts. And quite frankly, that's made me a little bit uncomfortable as a journalist. I'm always trying to figure out how to cover a story a little bit smarter than others. And I was having trouble really understanding, well, what actually took place, what led to the events that we're witnessing and covering. And one of the things I like to do on Smarter News is look at a story and strip it down to some of the basic questions that we're asking in that story. So we really understand what we're trying to get at when we're covering it, when we're doing some of our reporting. And so as I was thinking and reflecting on this story of Simone Biles, and there's so many different angles to it, I thought, the fundamental question here is, when do you push through a really challenging, stressful, difficult time? When do you accelerate through that? And when do you slam on the brakes? And how do you know? I mean, and that's a critical question, not only just for a high performance athlete, but really for the rest of us in our lives, and particularly probably over the last 18 months. I'm making an assumption here, but I can speak personally that we've likely all hit a breaking point of some point at some time and had to ask ourselves that question, what do I do here? Is it time for me to take a big step back? Or do I move through this moment? So I was looking for the ideal guest to tackle all of these questions. These are really big questions. I was looking for an ideal guest to talk about this, and I think we found him. His name is Rob Mack. He has a master's degree in applied positive psychology, and he's one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between happiness and success. Clearly something we all need, Rob.
Yes, including myself.
Well, you have an amazing story, which I'd love you to share with our audience too, about how you arrived to where you're at and how you developed expertise on this particular topic. But first, let's just talk a little bit about Simone Biles. I want to use this story in a way to talk about some of these bigger issues. But wherever I've gone this week, this has been the topic of conversation. What did you think just from your perspective, from your professional perspective, when you heard and saw these headlines, what went through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think at first I was saddened by that, right? Because of course we all want to see Simone Biles perform. I mean, she's just an outstanding, extraordinary athlete, and makes us all feel so excited just to watch the Olympics, and particularly this year. And she's been the face of the Olympics too, right? So she sort of represents the Olympics, at least as far as Americans are concerned. And so I felt sad about that first and foremost. And then I felt not only sad for all of us, but I felt sad for her, because this is an athlete who has trained her entire life to perform at her very best, at sort of on stage in front of the entire world. And so I knew that, at least from my perspective, that if she was making a decision to not compete, at least for today or the next day or the week, or maybe at all in these Olympics, that it must have been something very serious and something that meant a whole lot to her. And the more I sort of read about it, the more I sort of discovered that she was prioritizing her mental health and focusing on that first and foremost. And so I really applaud and commend her for that, because that's not an easy decision, particularly when you've spent your entire life perfecting your skill and ability in one specific area, such that you get to this place, and get to really shine. And so I knew that wasn't an easy decision. So I really commend her for making that very difficult decision.
There's been wildly different opinions on this, Rob, as you know, though, right? There's been people that are saying she's a champion for mental health. And there are others, and I'm just generalizing here, but I think we've probably all heard it at this point. There are others just saying, hey, listen, this isn't about her. This is about the Olympics. She's serving the country. This is a team event. And this is a bad example for our children, for one, that she's not pushing through this moment. It's a tough call. So when you hear that criticism, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I'd say that ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a choice and decision that Simone Biles has to make for Simone Biles, right? Which is a very difficult decision, particularly when the entire world is watching. And I would say that, in addition to that, you know, health is everything, right? Without health, you don't have anything else. You can't do anything else. If you don't have health, it's very difficult to perform well. It's very difficult to enjoy your life. It's very difficult to sort of, fulfill the other roles and responsibilities that you have in your life. And that includes mental health. We often don't think of mental health like physical health, but it's very similar to physical health. If your mental health is compromised, you cannot not only perform in the way that you're used to performing, but it also begins to erode other aspects of your life, your relationships, and also your physical performance itself, right? And even your physical health, right? So particularly for an athlete, I mean, someone like Simone Biles, if she's not finding herself centered and she's not finding herself like emotionally regulated or emotionally ordered, and she's finding herself off balance mentally, psychologically, and emotionally, it's no surprise that she'd find herself off physically in terms of being off balance and off centered physically. We talked a little bit about the twisties that she was experiencing, right? And that could lead to other problems. You can very easily get injured. I mean, this isn't like the safest sport in the world, right? So I'd say for a lot of folks, it can be difficult to understand. But if you've ever suffered with mental health challenges, if you've ever suffered with physical health challenges, you know how absolutely important and critical it is that you prioritize those things above everything else.
Well, it goes to the reason why the facts of the story are important too, right? There's so many really strong opinions, but our facts have somewhat changed. So when this story first broke earlier this week, the initial headlines was actually doing some reporting for Smart News at the time. So I was doing one of our lives. The initial headlines were suggesting that there was an injury. And I thought to myself, okay, hold on, we're going to need to see what this is about. Because normally, one of the things you learn as a journalist is that the initial reports are actually wrong. So it's important to just be slow. As the story evolved, that's when Simone Biles was talking. No, I'm physically fine, but I'm the mental stress from this moment, the challenge that I'm facing is actually putting me in a dangerous situation. And that in was great information to know, but in and of itself, it's also a little bit vague because if I said to you, Rob, I'm feeling really stressed, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety, um, I don't think I can compete. That's very different than if I'm having an anxiety attack. I can't catch my breath. I can't eat. I'm throwing up before like all these other things are happening, or maybe even something more severe. So without knowing that, we don't, again, the opinions are floating all around and wildly different. And then today, just this morning, Simone Biles was explaining a little bit more what's called the twisties, which I guess I didn't know anything about this in gymnastics, is that it almost sounds like vertigo when they're performing a certain exercise in the air, that they can lose where they are. And without that equilibrium, it's super dangerous. And she was saying that sometimes you get the twisties and you work through it and you get out of it, but it might take you a couple days or even a couple weeks to do that. And so again, we're getting like different degrees of understanding this issue. Some of the conversation has gone to getting away from specifically gymnastics, though, Rob and Simone Biles, about whether or not this would be acceptable for any other athlete in any other sport. Whether or not we're suddenly going to see Tom Brady bowing out of the Super Bowl because of mental health reasons. And that, to some, sounds preposterous because there's been a lot of athletes that have competed in highly stressful situations. Do you think we're just at a different stage with this conversation? Has something suddenly dramatically changed? Do you think we'll see a rash of athletes take a knee all of a sudden because of what Simone Biles did?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that, for sure, there's been a normalization around mental health conversations. I think we're all much more aware of how important mental health is, and we're also much more aware of what a clinical diagnosis might mean or might look like, and we're much more sensitive to that. So I'd say that that's a really good thing, right? We want to destigmatize, conversations around mental illness and mental health. Love that, right? Mental health awareness. I would say, the challenge, of course, is, particularly for young kids, where that line is between building resilience, right, and encouraging them to continue to persist and build patience and build strength and have some courage and all those good things, and let's say quitting, right, or giving up, right, too early. And that's a very serious, and very difficult conversation to have with little kids, especially, but even young adults, right? And I think part of the conversation here is you got to remember also, not only is Simone Biles. She's only 24 years of age. I mean, at 24 years of age, I was still learning how to tie my shoelaces. I mean, basic things, right? So it's that, but also, to her, credit, I mean, she's put in tens of thousands of hours of practice and training. I'm sure that she's familiar enough with her own body and with her own mind and with her own performance levels to recognize the difference between, oh, I'm just having an off day, or I'm just not feeling like myself. And I'm putting myself and even my team in a place where we could fail or not succeed or, possibly get, injured. Right. And so, that's something that we don't want to take too lightly. Like, she's perfected and sort of cultivated this craft that she's extraordinarily like surgical with. And so at this point, there's a difference between that and being a novice at a sport and just giving up because it feels hard.
She actually said something to that effect. She said on, and this I screenshot it from her Instagram account. She said, I didn't have a bad performance and quit. I've had plenty of bad performances throughout my career and finished the competition. I simply got so lost. My safety was at risk as well as a team's medal. So that's how this is again, some of just the fresh information we're speaking on Friday morning. We're just getting to. She also said, for anyone saying I quit, I didn't quit. My mind and body are simply not in sync. As you can see here, and I assume she had posted the picture of her tumbling. I don't think you realize how dangerous this is on a hard competition surface, nor do I have to explain why I put my health first. Physical health is mental health. And that's how and again, this is how she's framing the conversation. You brought up something so important there, though, about courage and knowing yourself and knowing when to go and when to stop. And so I'd like to kind of talk to you about that, because when I think about teaching my kids about perseverance, I wonder if I'm actually a good role model, because I'll tell you, Rob, I will grind and grind until I'm at a breaking point. And that's the way and I'm much older, decades, in fact, than Simone Biles, and I still haven't really figured it out. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that. I mean, how do you know how to evaluate a situation and say, no, you know what? This is the moment that I'm going to rise to the occasion. And I actually do feel at risk on any number of levels, but I'm going to do it anyways. Or when do you say, no, full stop?
Yeah, it's such a great question. You need a lot of data points. You need a lot of data gathering experiences to get to a place where you can confidently and accurately assess whether or not you're pushing yourself hard enough. And still you might be wrong. You might be a little off, right? And so that's the challenge, I think, particularly for those of us like sitting in the crowd in the audience, like with a beer in our hands, watching this performance and then judging, whether or not a athlete like Simone Biles should continue to perform or not. It's like, we haven't put in those tens of thousands of hours to know where she is in terms of, being able to perform well or not, and where her mental health and physical health is. And so to that point, it's very difficult to know without experience. Experience is the only explanation. The only explanation is experience. And so you have to have lived enough and practiced enough or trained enough at whatever it is that you want to do in your life, and have sort of gone beyond your limits and then suffered the consequences of that. And then also at times given up too early and suffered the consequences of that, to know where this middle sort of sweet spot is, right? But that's different for everyone. That's the difficulty with sort of like looking at anybody else's experiences from the outside and then thinking that there's an objectively right answer for any particular person, because this is an inherently subjective experience, right? Everybody experiences it differently. It's like, I grew up watching Michael Jordan. I remember him playing with the flu. He just played through, it was unbelievable. We were inspired by that, right? But not everyone's Michael Jordan. And also, that's not always necessarily a bad thing. We only need one Michael Jordan. So yeah, it's a very difficult decision and choice to sort of make. And you only know it by having made a lot of wrong decisions around that for a long period of time. So you have enough data points to string together to make an accurate sort of decision about it.
So how do you practice that? How do you practice that resilience, especially for if we're talking about children, for example, teenagers, young adults, even those that are in their 20s that are trying to figure out that range, or even those of us that are older that still want to practice courage and resilience and understanding how to fine tune that. Is experience the only thing that teaches us that, or can we do other things?
Yeah, so I'd say that experience is great. Certainly, there's so much great research out there and books out there. Angela Duckworth wrote a fantastic book called Grit, right? It's all about building grit. And there's a great book, Learned Optimism, and there's one by Karen Ryder called, Resilience Factor. And so there were some great books out there. A huge piece of it really is about developing learned optimism, right? So it's like, how do you explain the good and bad events that happen in your life, right? And so when something good happens, do you describe that in the way that allows you to personalize it, meaning that you take credit for it, right? That also allows you to assign persistence and perseverance to it, meaning that it's something that's going to continue to persist through time and space, right? And so, in other words, I did this great thing at school or on the field. And can I now then say, there's something right about me, something that I did to make that happen, that I can continue to put effort towards, that will let me experience more and more success in not only that space, but other spaces, right? And so, a huge piece of this is about developing an explanatory style that is optimistic, scientifically optimistic, right? And then when bad events happen, you sort of explain them in a different way, which is like, well, it was the conditions and circumstances. But a huge piece of this is learning to praise ourselves and each other, and especially our kids, based on their work ethic and their effort, not just their results, not just the outcome, not just the fruits of their action. It's critical, right? Because often as parents, what we want to do is we want to applaud kids or compliment kids or express our appreciation because they got the right results. They got the A, or they scored so many points. But really, we want to be sort of complimenting them and praising them for the effort they put in, no matter what result they get, right? So that's one of the ways too that you can sort of begin to build grit and resilience, particularly in other people.
I'm thinking about my childhood. I'm thinking about your childhood. You have such an interesting story that helped you arrive at the moment that you're at right now, where you can actually talk about happiness and success and the connection between them. Hopefully, that we'll talk about in just a moment. Rob, can you tell us a little bit about your story, because you certainly have an a very intimate relationship with resilience. And
Yeah.
I'd love our audience to know a little bit about how you arrived in this career path that you're at, where you're able to help a lot of people.
Oh, thanks for asking that question, Jeff. I mean, I was, I think, from my perspective, the least resilient kid in the world. I felt like I was born deeply unhappy. I mean, I remember being stressed out, anxious, and self-loathing at like 6 or 7 years of age. And I always thought that I would grow out of that, if I eventually found a girlfriend and I did well in school and I became the professional basketball player that I always wanted to be, that and made great money, I would eventually become happy and I'd become resilient and strong. That wasn't really the case, at least not right away. As I got older, despite performing well athletically and academically and even okay socially, I just became more and more depressed, so depressed that I eventually began experiencing like suicidal ideation every day, dozens of times a day. I thought about it more than anything else. And so I came to a place where I did some research, decided I was going to slash my wrist, got a kitchen knife, dug it into my wrist, still have the suicide test marks to this day. And something very strange and unpredictable happened in that moment, which was, I had a good life. I had 2 German cars, I had a beautiful girlfriend, I had a great job, I made good money, I was healthy. But I was experiencing this existential angst. Like, we're all put on this earth without a rule book. We don't, we work so hard to achieve and acquire and accomplish these things and to love these people. And one day they're all taken away from us. That disturbed me deeply at a very young age. So when I'm digging this knife into my wrist without anything in my external conditions or circumstances changing, I suddenly felt a peace and a joy and a sense of well being that I had never experienced before. So, strangely enough, and it sounds sort of funny this time, I just decided to put off suicide for like 15 minutes. It was just 15 minutes. And I kind of laugh now because it seems like such a short period of time. But at that time, 15 minutes felt like forever. Like I could never last 15 minutes. But in that 15 minutes, I began to do some research and I discovered, most importantly, that I wasn't alone, that most people, well, everyone suffers, but most people experience anxiety and depression at some point in their lives, right? And I continued the research. And so, needless to say, that 15 minutes bled into several days, which bled into several years. And now I look back and it's been about 2 decades. And it's incredible the resilience you can build if you just focus on the step ahead of you and not trying to sort of climb the whole staircase at once.
At that moment when you said that you had that sudden moment of peace, what do you credit that how do you how do you think of that moment and what that was all about?
So it's taken me 20 years to really understand and appreciate, integrate that into my life. But the truth is, I call it divine intervention, but the truth is, for once in my life, I had stopped self ruminating and worrying and analyzing and evaluating everything and everybody in my life, including myself, and my mind was simply quiet.
Mm.
And in that quiet was peace, and in that peace was happiness.
And so that led you to really think about the connection, not only of what happiness is, but now you're connecting it with there's success in there, kind of mixed into that pot. And so now what is your work, Rob? You work with individuals to help them navigate some of the exact topics that we're talking about right now?
Exactly. That's the work that I do. So I really work as a sort of a happiness coach, a positive psychology expert by trade. And what that mostly means is that I share the best of what science has to offer around this conversation, right? So it's the positive psychology science, but also my own sort of personal experiences. Most of us sort of understand intellectually that success doesn't lead to happiness, but the science of positive psychology shares that not only does success not lead to happiness, but happiness is actually highly correlated and directly correlated with success. So that means that happy people experience um, better, longer lives. They live 6 to 7 years longer on average. They make $600 to $700,000 more on average over the course of their lifetime than their unhappy counterparts. They get married earlier, stay married longer, are happier in all the relationships, whether they're married or not. They experience less job burnout, better job performance, right? So happiness, believe it or not, is not only the greatest success, because I'd say that's what success is for, but it also leads to success in traditional ways, right? And so that's part of the work that I do is help people sort of discover this innate inherent happiness within, and then find as a result of that increasingly effortless success in their lives.
Hmm. All right, we're all signed up. We'd all like to enroll in that. That sounds great. We're in. That's all we need. Well,
Awesome. You're
well,
all
we were
received.
when we were talking a little bit yesterday, we were talking about this topic and getting to know each other a little bit more. And you said something I thought was so profound and so important for all of us to know at this time, that one of the things that you're really noticing in your work is 18 months into this pandemic, that a lot of individuals are experiencing these existential questions now, not at the beginning of the they thought they were at the beginning of the pandemic, but now for some reason in this particular moment that we're in, this stage, it's bringing up a lot of that. Tell us a little bit more about what you're noticing and why you think it's important.
Absolutely. So, it's so interesting because I got into the work that I do because I love talking about the existential stuff. It's like, why are we here? What is our purpose? What is our meaning? Right? Like, what's this whole thing called life about? So,
I'm tackling those questions, Rob, and also what I'm making for dinner. And I tell you, it's like I can't do it. I can't do it all. I can't. And what the CDC is saying, yeah, I'm with you. Okay,
and
keep
you
going.
nailed it. So to your point, and that's a good point, because part of this is that clearly you have demonstrated like you've got this incredible cognitive agility, right? So that's great, but not all of us are so cognitively agile. And so what's happened, especially with the pandemic here, is that when you're locked in your house or your apartment, maybe with family, maybe alone, you aren't as easy. It's not as easy to distract yourselves with all kinds of different forms of entertainment. And so you're sort of forced to face up to and look at what your life actually consists of. And if you spend most of the day on a laptop, you spend most of your day working, because what else is there to do? You suddenly come to a recognition, realization, and maybe even a little disappointment that your life doesn't look exactly the way you'd expect it to look. And then you begin to go deeper and you question, well, what's any life for, right? What's the purpose and meaning of any life? Like, what makes life truly worth living? And am I living that life now? Right. And so in my practice, I mean, it's unbelievable. Folks that I would never have been able to have that conversation with before are leading with that conversation, right? And so we're all sort of coming to a place where this adversity that we'll call the pandemic is causing us to slow down, sort of take stock and reprioritize what's truly important and who's truly important, right? So that's the other piece of it, is that it all helps, this experience is also weeding out the weak relationships in our lives, and it's strengthening the strong relationships in our lives. But this existential anxiety that most of us run from our entire lives by chasing more money or by chasing another partner or by chasing, anything that we chase, we're actually not able to run from quite as easily anymore. And we're forced to actually address the root cause of it itself.
And so that's all kind of coming to the surface. These eat, pray, love moments that you're, and one of the things you were saying is you're finding that some people are having those moments, right? That they're like, I'm out. Everything that I worked for, I'm going to Bali, or I'm, I'm going like as I was talking about, I was like, I see myself in a white dress in Italy, twirling around. I see it right now. I could just leave it all behind. and you and you have some people that that's exactly what they should be doing, which is like, just this is wrong. And then other people that that's actually the worst thing that they could do for themselves is that they're actually not, they're creating almost more clutter. So,
That's right.
and that kind of brings us back circle to this full conversation about this particular moment in the Olympics, or this particular moment that we're all sharing in the pandemic, of like, how can you best, when you're feeling so confused about what is the right path for you, how can you best inform yourself?
Well, that's a great point, right? And so I would say that another way, one way to sort of best inform yourself is to like look to the examples and the teachings and even the biographies of people who have been there and done that before, right? So I've always been smart enough to know that I'm not very smart. So it's like I want to learn from smarter people, right? And so, it's incredible what people have shared in their books and their videos or whatnot and online, what's available. And so I'd say, look to that. I mean, there are great books. I mean, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, right? He's a philosopher king, and he talks about, he would just share his thoughts every day about like what truly matters. And as he's got older, he'd say, "Oh, this thing that I thought mattered before doesn't matter at all, and death feels imminent. So maybe I should, at least explore the possibility of having this eat, pray, love moment, right?
Well,
Or
and
not."
can I say something for that? I find I will Google all sorts of. I spent like 30 minutes the other day Googling the best way to organize this. I'm going to share this with you.
Me too.
The best way to organize my tech cords. Okay. I have spent approximately zero time Googling like anything that you're talking about. Right. And that shows you like where my priorities are. But you're right. The information's out there. Look at what we spend looking for. And what is, there's people that have actually done this better than us. So maybe I'll put
Absolutely.
Marcus Aurelius on my.
Yes. There you go, Jenna. You can save yourself a lot of time, energy, and effort. I mean, if anything has been a cheat code in my life, it's like just check out and copy from the best, right? In terms of how to live your life. It's like, why recreate the will? So you're absolutely right about that, and to your point, it's like really seductive and tempting to continue to sort of just self-distract. And there's actually very good, valuable reasons to do that, right? It can be healthy, especially if you're feeling like you're really spiraling. Like when you're really spiraling, you're spinning out and you're deep in self rumination, probably thinking more about what's bothering you won't necessarily help, right? But if you can get yourself back to a place of emotional neutrality, from there, you have a little bit more momentum and you can then dive into these deeper questions like, what is my life for, right? So you can always look to folks that are smarter or professionals around this. But also, I would say you can look into your past as well. Just notice those moments in your life and those experiences, relationships in your life that made you feel so inspired and uplifted and happy and excited to be alive? When did you feel like your life was meaningful and purposeful? When did you feel like you were experiencing a psychologically and emotionally and maybe even spiritually rich life? Can you put together a few data points and then sort of extract a few themes from that, right? So for me, I know like having these kinds of conversations for me it's just life changing for me. I live for these moments, right? So everyone can do that. Everyone can sort of do this little forensics activity, and they can identify their happiness islands or their meaning islands or their purpose islands, but identify those things and those moments and those relationships and those activities that allow you to feel like you're really living a life or have lived a life worth living.
Oh, that's such great advice. That's really good advice. And I'm already kind of thinking back, well, what would those times be if they're not now? And how do you kind of create that treasure map for yourself for so you could, because it is one of the things I've noticed as a journalist is that, and I really have experienced this in my own life, is that the stories are about getting lost and finding yourself again. That is part of it. We tend to think it's just from point A to point B, right? But that the more and more stories that I cover, the ones that are really good are the ones about getting lost repeatedly and then finding your way
Absolutely.
back.
Jen, it's so good. You're giving me shivers because been one of the discoveries in my life too. It's like my favorite movies are that. Think about what movies entertain you, keep you engaged the most. It's always the ones that are a bit of a roller coaster, right? And it's because of the bitter moments that the sweet ones are so sweet, right? It's that contrast effect. And so, to your point, absolutely, you have to knock on a lot of wrong doors before you ever discover the right one. And it's by falling down and getting back up that you build strength and you build resilience, right? And you can't build it any other way. You can try to think your way there. You can try to theorize about it, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it requires you sort of taking some really practical, tactical action around it. And that does not exclude failure. I mean, there is such a thing as failing up, right? There is such a thing as
Mhm.
building strength and resilience from failure. And most of the folks that I talk to, particularly the successful ones and happy ones, would argue that they've learned more and been enriched more by their failures than by their success.
Well, it's reminding me about a really important lesson in journalism. I was in graduate school and in Columbia University, you're in New York City, and one of the things they make you do is they make you pick a part of the city that's not Manhattan, and you have to go find stories in this particular neighborhood, which can be far. Mine was the farthest away, the last stop on the 7 train. Which, if I knew the subway map better, I would have chosen a different neighborhood because I'd spent a lot of time on that subway. But it was, it's very intimidating to have to like walk up to people and just like find stories, especially when you're new. But one of the things that I learned is that you have to let your feet take you there. If you're not standing there, you're missing a huge part of the story. And it's something I actually look forward to doing more with Smarter News, because we can do a lot from where we are. And I hope to make people's lives a lot more simple, make them spend less time on the news, make it easier for them, and free up them so they can tell their own stories by making this really digestible. But there's a point of this that you got to get off the chair and you got to go and you got to see. And that's bringing us again back to Simone Biles. That's part of this story. I want people just to think about we're able to have so much access to so many things. And yet oftentimes we're going to be missing some of the key parts of the story simply because we're not there and we can't feel it. We can't see it. It's not
Precisely. That's
right.
precisely right. And you're absolutely right about that. Like it takes, like to your first point, it takes a lot of experiences or experiencing of what you're not to know who and what you truly are. Right. That's a
Right.
huge piece of it. It's like, how are you going to know who you are if you don't have experiences that mirror back to you what you're not? Right. So that's the first piece. The other piece is you're right. Like, and this also speaks to the resilience piece. It's like resilience isn't just putting your head down and charging through every brick wall in front of you. That's not intelligent, right? That's not going to be very efficient or effective, and that's not going to certainly be very enjoyable. It's not about like turning off like the speedometer or turning off the gas tank sensor. It's not, and that's what people think about, like just charge through. But no, real resilience is actually still being in touch with what you're feeling on the inside while you're experiencing what you're experiencing, right? And if you can't do that, if you're not keeping this sensor or this radar like on, and you're not keeping your finger on the pulse of that, then that's not true resilience, right? Because now you're putting yourself and others in positions and places of danger, right? And so that's the other piece of this, which is like, there is an emotional intelligence piece, there was a self-awareness piece, and there was an emotional regulation piece. And particularly for not just athletes, but artists and entrepreneurs and stay-at-home moms and dads, it's like, if you want to live the most efficient, effective, and enjoyable life possible, you want to be in flow state as consistently as you can. Flow state is that state in space where you are so tapped in, tuned in, turned on that you're 500 to 1,000% more effective and efficient and efficacious at whatever it is you happen to be doing. You also tend to enjoy whatever you happen to be doing more than you would almost anything else, right? But there's a loss of sort of time consciousness there, and even self-conscious in terms of like self-evaluation, right? So you're just in the moment, deeply in the moment, very present. So I just wanted to bring that point up because I think it's an important one for folks who care about resilience.
I love that. Flow.
Yeah.
Flow is the goal. I'm
Yes.
gonna write that down. Flow. Okay. As we finish up, we really covered a lot. I feel like we've had our own eat, pray, love moment. Actually, I think, Robbie.
Yes,
So this is good.
actually.
We look at we
Totally.
save so much money on travel. It's good. So I always like to end the conversation. We'll continue to watch the developments in the Olympics. What a fun thing to be able to tap into. By the way, it's the first time I've kind of watched something consistently in a couple of years, and it's so amazing to see all these stories of all these athletes. So we'll continue to watch that story develop. We'll think about what you're talking. I mean, give us a lot to really think about. But as I like to end our interviews with our guests, is as if they can give us something smarter. And so because your focus is happiness and success, and I know we've talked a lot about that in ways that we can do our own research. Can you give us one assignment? Like what's the one thing that we should do, or what's the one really important connection we should know about happiness and success and bringing those two things together?
Yeah, boy, that's a big question. That's
I
like
know.
the
Sorry.
favorite organ or favorite kid, but I love it. I just love that question. I would say that probably this happiness islands thing is very important. So if you can just identify the people, places, activities, and things that you like for their own sake, right? For the intrinsic motivation, the intrinsic reward that you get out of it. So in other words, if nobody was paying attention and you weren't paid for it, what do you love doing so much that you'd almost want to pay someone else to let you do? Right. So just identify those people, places, activities that you love for their own sake that allow you to feel sort of jazzed and inspired and engaged. And just identify those things and then see if you can weave more and more of those things in your life. The opposite of that is your happiness valley. So just identify those things, people, places, activities that you just hate, right? That just suck, that don't make you feel energized, make you feel drained. And see if you can't outsource, delegate, reduce, eliminate, automate, or regulate those things. So in other words, get them off your plate somehow. I'd say that's probably one of the best things. And then second to that, I would say that probably the best, surprisingly, tool that I ever discovered for increasing your happiness and thereby increasing your success in life, right? Because we remember happiness is tied to increasingly effortless success, is what I call micro meditation. So I don't know about you, but I've tried meditating before and like 30 minutes felt too long and 5 minutes felt like too long, but one breath, we can all take one breath. So the idea is you take one breath only for joy's sake alone. And so you take this one breath like it's the last breath you'll ever take, okay? And really try to pretend like it's the last breath you ever get. Let all your thoughts go and try to juice that one breath for as much joy as you can possibly get out of it. Like really be sincere about it, right? So you can do that as often as you can remember throughout the day, no matter what else you're doing. If you could do that and stick with it for about 22 to 66 days, based on all the neuroplasticity research, you'd begin to rewire your brain for a much more healthy, harmonious, and even wealthy experience of life.
I love that.
Yeah, everybody can do it.
Because my Apple Watch yells at me on a regular basis telling me to breathe, and I'm like, "I'm breathing." You can't feel it because I'm just holding on, and it makes me breathe for 60 seconds. I'm like, "This is too." I can do one. I can do one. I love that. I'm into
Exactly. And if you can do one, it's just rinse, wash, repeat. Everybody can
Yeah.
do one moment, even a micro moment. So yeah, and I love the point around the Apple Watch. They too tend to scream at you. It feels like.
They do. They're like, you're almost to your standing goals." I'm like, "It's 11 o'clock at night. Okay, give me a break. Okay." In some ways, it's really great. It's been really helpful. In some ways, it keeps me off my phone, but the breathing thing every once in a while, I know there's probably a way to turn it off. But anyway, Rob, this has been so great. I feel like we've learned a lot. I can't wait to try some of the things that you taught us about today, and I really look forward to you coming back. So I'm there's so many different stories that we could talk about happiness and success, and we look forward to having you back on Smart News. Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure and privilege. Thank you so much. Your energy is infectious, truly infectious.
Well, and as you said, what am I cognitive
Agile.
agility?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
cognitive agility. You're cognitively agile.
My husband's going to hear that one, Rob. I'm like,
Like Rob said.
my children are also Rob. Thank you. Quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news, a refuge from the storm. I'm Jenna. Thank you for choosing smarter.